When you look through all the research, there's a very specific type of exercise that leads to increased muscle strength, reduction in pain for people with arthritis, and improved stability to perform basic activities like getting up and down from a chair or squatting, and it's something that's called progressive resistance training. And today I'll explain why I think simple resistance bands like these bands are the best tools for progressive resistance training, just like we read in all of the research articles that highlight the benefits of PRS. And if we haven't met before, welcome to the channel. I'm Tim Fraticelli, and I'm a physical therapist, and on this channel we love talking about all things related to physical therapy career, treatment, and technology. And if you find this information to be helpful, I would love it if you give this video a like and consider subscribing to the channel for more helpful videos. So what is progressive resistance training? Well, it's a fancy term for using equipment like resistance bands because of their tendency to become progressively more difficult to move as you stretch it through a range. Obviously, bands are lightweight, but they allow you to experience 5, 10, or even up to 100 pounds or more of resistance depending on how many bands that you're using and the point of tension for each of these bands. And for you, that means you can get just as much of a good workout with a good set of resistance bands as you would throwing around heavy weights. But the added benefit of resistance bands compared to static weights is that resistance bands incorporate that progressive resistance training that's causing your muscles to work harder through the range and getting more of a work at the very end range like a band would provide. Now, I'm going to be using some bands from some physical therapists that I really respect named Bob and Brad, and I'll do a full review of these exact bands in a follow-up video. So it's no surprise to hear that older people generally lose muscle as they age, but there was a really interesting review of some research that looked at over 120 randomized controlled trials with over 6,700 participants, and it focused on the effect of using progressive resistance strength training like the use of resistance bands. And not surprisingly, the result among these 120 plus studies showed that using resistance tools like these simple resistance bands not only resulted in greater muscle strength, but it translated directly into simple activities like walking or climbing stairs, or even standing up from a chair more quickly and with more stability. And aside from just basic movements, this type of exercise translated into better performance of more complex tasks like preparing a meal, or bathing, or dressing, and even resulted in less pain for people with osteoarthritis. So aside from all of those great benefits identified in those studies, here are some of my opinions as to why I like resistance bands compared to the traditional free weights. Let's take a look. Okay, number one is that with resistance band, you can get resistance in almost any plane of motion. Typically with a free weight, we rely on gravity to pull that weight down, which provides the resistance up and down really just in this one plane. But with a resistance band, I can achieve that same type of resistance from a free weight, but I can also incorporate different planes of motion very quickly without having to move my entire body just to accommodate for gravity. It seems like a simple difference, but I assure you that is the biggest difference between resistance bands and just free weights: the ability to target specific muscles while you're standing in all sorts of different planes. Now, if I want to strengthen my rotator cuff, for example, while standing, I can stretch the band outwards. But if I were to use just a regular free weight and do that similar motion, I'm not actually achieving the resistance in this plane. The resistance is going downward. That's because gravity is pulling that weight down. So what's happening is that I'm just totally resisting this free weight from going down to the ground, and that's just strengthening or stressing my biceps, and we don't get it as targeted as a workout of the rotator cuff, for example, when I'm going this way, because obviously the resistance, the pull, is going left and right, and that's the type of rotation resistance that we need with the rotator cuff. So that's just one example of how the planes of motion really play into determining the effectiveness of resistance training with a stretch band like this, or a resistance band versus a free weight. Okay, the second reason I like using resistance bands is because of something called progressive resistance. We mentioned it earlier, but progressive resistance is sometimes called accommodating or variable resistance, and it's the concept of something getting more difficult to move as you move it through the range. And that's the basic definition of progressive resistance training. And this is the type of exercise that I was referring to in that review of the research, and is exactly what you get when you use resistance bands with a workout. From upper body workouts to trunk and core exercises and even lower body strengthening, there are so many ways to integrate resistance bands into your workout, incorporating that progressive resistance training I do it all the time in the clinic, and this is one of our go-tos in the physical therapy clinic, these resistance bands. And the third reason I like resistance bands like these are the convenience and the cost factors. You can basically have an entire rack of weights fit into a small bag like this and use them if you're traveling or move them from room to room. And they're much more affordable than traditional weights, coming in around $40 for this set of bands that I have. It's really unbelievable how many different exercises you can do with a $40 set of resistance bands. These are the tube resistance bands and the attachments for securing to a door. That's really convenient as you're able to do almost every exercise with simple setup at your door. And there are a variation of these resistance bands that I'll go over in another video. Those are the flat rubber bands that can be used for even more unique setups. But for the average person who's wanting the benefits of progressive resistance training, I'd recommend this simple set of bands, the round tube style bands. But for someone who's wanting even more options for weight training, maybe you should consider those flat bands. But there's nothing wrong with having both sets of bands for less than $100 for an entire home gym setup. But the bottom line is that resistance bands can provide you with just as much of a workout and just as much benefit as free weights for a fraction of the cost. Not only are these resistance bands great for rehabilitation, like I use them in the clinic, but they're safe and they're effective for people who want an affordable way to work out at home. So be sure to check out the bands that I recommend to my family and my friends and my patients. Those are the Bob and Brad Physical Therapy Resistance Bands. You can find a link to those in the description below. And if you found this video helpful, I would love it if you gave it a like below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.